The restaurant was packed when the owner was turned away from his own front door, his little daughter standing beside him with a birthday card clutched against her chest. The hostess looked him up and down, saw an exhausted single father in a faded work jacket, and quietly told him there were no tables available. What she did not know was that the man she had just humiliated had signed every lease, paid every paycheck, and built the restaurant from an empty storefront into one of the most beloved places in the city. And by the time the staff discovered who he really was, their regret would come far too late. If you believe kindness, forgiveness, hope, and second chances can change someone's life, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so our family can keep bringing you stories that remind us what truly matters. His name was Everett Calloway, a 41-year-old father who had spent the last 7 years building a restaurant called the Willow Table from almost nothing. He had not inherited money, a famous family name, or a business empire. He had started with a small loan, a second-hand delivery van, and a stubborn belief that food could make lonely people feel less alone. Before opening the restaurant, Everett had worked nearly every job imaginable in kitchens. He had washed dishes, carried boxes, repaired broken refrigerators, prepared vegetables before sunrise, and learned that a successful restaurant was not built by expensive furniture or fashionable menus. It was built by people who cared whether the person sitting across from them felt welcome. Everett had become a single father after his wife, Marin, died following a sudden illness 3 years earlier. Their daughter, Wren, had been only 6 at the time. Everett had never allowed grief to become an excuse for disappearing from his daughter's life. He packed her lunches, helped with homework, attended school meetings, braided her hair badly when she asked him to, and somehow kept the restaurant alive while making sure Wren never felt that she had lost both parents at once. The Willow Table became more than a business to him. It became the place where he had survived the hardest years of his life. That morning, Everett had something special planned. Wren was turning 10, and for months she had been asking for one simple thing: lunch at the restaurant where she had spent so many afternoons drawing pictures in the corner booth. Everett had promised her that on her birthday they would have their own little celebration at the restaurant, just the two of them. He had even prepared a small cake with strawberries because strawberries were Wren's favorite. But Everett had been away from the restaurant for several weeks. He had recently hired a new general manager, Preston Vale, to oversee daily operations while Everett spent more time with Wren. Everett had deliberately stepped back because he wanted to be a father first. He believed the restaurant would be safe in the hands of people he trusted. Unfortunately, while Everett was away, Preston had changed the culture of the restaurant. He had introduced strict dress standards for customers, pushed employees to prioritize wealthy guests, and repeatedly told the staff that appearances mattered because premium customers don't want to feel surrounded by ordinary people. Everett had never approved those changes. He simply did not know how far Preston had gone. That afternoon, Everett arrived wearing a simple gray jacket, worn jeans, and sneakers. He had spent the morning fixing a leaking pipe beneath the restaurant's storage area before taking Wren to lunch. He was tired, his sleeves were slightly stained, and he looked nothing like the polished owner whose photograph appeared in a local business magazine years earlier. Wren walked beside him, smiling nervously as she held her birthday card. She had drawn a picture of their family on the front. It showed herself, her father, and her mother beneath a giant yellow sun. Everett had noticed that Wren always drew Marin a little higher than everyone else, as if she were watching over them from the sky. When they reached the entrance, the hostess, Brielle Hart, stepped in front of them. Brielle was 24, ambitious, and terrified of making mistakes at work. Preston had warned the staff that the restaurant was fully booked and that they should never allow walk-ins to interfere with important reservations. Brielle looked at Everett and then at Wren. She checked the reservation system even though Everett had told her his name. There was no reservation under Calloway because Everett had intentionally avoided making one. He had wanted to surprise Wren by simply walking into the restaurant he owned and sitting at their favorite table. Brielle politely but firmly told him that the restaurant was completely booked and that she could not seat them. Everett smiled and explained that he owned the restaurant. Brielle assumed he was joking. She had heard customers make strange claims before, especially when they were denied tables. She asked him to leave. Everett's smile disappeared. Wren looked up at her father, confused. She did not understand why the place that had always felt like home suddenly felt so cold. Everett tried again, calmly explaining that he had opened the willow table himself and that he was simply there to have lunch with his daughter. Brielle glanced toward the dining room, where every table seemed occupied by sharply dressed guests. Then she looked back at Everett's worn jacket and Wren's simple birthday clothes. She told him that if he really were the owner, he should know better than to arrive without a reservation. That sentence hurt Everett more than he expected. He could have called Preston. He could have shown her the legal documents stored on his phone. He could have demanded that someone recognize him. Instead, he looked at his daughter's face and saw disappointment beginning to replace excitement. Everett quietly thanked Brielle and turned away. Wren followed him, trying not to cry. They walked only a few steps before Everett noticed an elderly couple sitting outside on a nearby bench. The woman was holding a small grocery bag, and the man was rubbing his hands together as though they were cold despite the warm afternoon. Everett recognized them. They had been customers at the Willow table since its first month. He approached them and asked if they had eaten lunch. They admitted they had come to celebrate their wedding anniversary but had been told the restaurant was too crowded. Everett looked toward the restaurant. Then he looked at Wren. He smiled. He told the couple to come with them. Across the street was a small family cafe with only a handful of tables. Everett bought lunch for the elderly couple, ordered Wren a strawberry dessert, and sat beside his daughter beneath a bright afternoon window. Wren finally opened her birthday card and handed it to him. Inside, she had written that her father was the best dad in the world because he always made people feel important. Everett struggled to hold back tears. He told her that the restaurant had forgotten something very important. Wren asked what. Everett told her that a restaurant could have beautiful plates, expensive food, and hundreds of customers, but if it forgot how to make people feel welcome, then it had forgotten the reason it existed. Meanwhile, inside the Willow table, Preston was celebrating one of the restaurant's busiest afternoons. He had no idea that the man he had been trying to keep away from the dining room was the owner. He had spent weeks telling employees that Everett was rarely involved anymore and that Preston was effectively running the business. Brielle returned to the front desk and mentioned the strange man who claimed to be the owner. Preston laughed. He told her that Everett was probably just another customer trying to get special treatment. But then something unexpected happened. One of the restaurant's longest-serving cooks, Malcolm Reeves, overheard the conversation. Malcolm had worked beside Everett from the beginning. He knew every scar on the man's hands, every sacrifice he had made, and every time Everett had stayed late to repair something because he refused to let an employee go home without getting paid. Malcolm immediately asked Brielle what the man looked like. When she described Everett, Malcolm's face went pale. He walked into the office and found the framed photograph of Everett that had been removed from the hallway after Preston redecorated the restaurant. Malcolm carried the photograph into the dining room. The staff slowly gathered around it. There was no doubt. The man they had just turned away was Everett Calloway. The owner. The founder. The man whose name was still on every legal document. Preston's confidence vanished. He demanded that everyone remain calm, but panic had already spread through the restaurant. Brielle looked toward the door. For the first time, she understood what she had done. She had not simply denied a customer. She had judged a man because of his clothes. And worse, she had allowed a little girl to walk away from her father's own restaurant on her birthday. Preston immediately ordered a driver to find Everett, but Everett was nowhere near the restaurant. He had taken Wren to a nearby public garden after lunch. They spent the afternoon walking beneath tall trees, watching children play, and sharing a small strawberry cake. Everett's phone began filling with messages. He ignored most of them. He was tired of being treated like a title instead of a person. Later that afternoon, he returned to the restaurant with Ren. The dining room had changed completely. The staff stood silently. Brielle was near the entrance with tears in her eyes. Preston stepped forward, ready to apologize, but Everett raised his hand. He asked everyone one question. He asked what they thought he had looked like when they first saw him. Nobody answered. Everett said he looked like a tired father who could not afford a table. Then he asked why that had mattered. Silence filled the room. Everett explained that when he founded the restaurant, he had written one rule on the first page of his business notebook: nobody enters hungry and leaves feeling worthless. He had not imagined that one day his own employees would forget it. Preston tried to defend himself by saying he had only been trying to protect the restaurant's image. Everett looked around at the expensive decorations and then at Ren. He said a restaurant's image was not its furniture. It was how it treated the person who had nothing to offer. That was when Malcolm stepped forward. He admitted that he had noticed the changes but had been afraid to challenge Preston because he feared losing his job. He apologized for remaining silent. Everett accepted the apology, but he also explained that silence could sometimes become part of the problem. Then Brielle approached. She was crying openly now. She admitted that she had judged Everett because of his clothes and because she believed important customers should look a certain way. She said she had been so afraid of upsetting wealthy guests that she had forgotten how frightening it was for an ordinary person to be told they did not belong. Everett looked at her for several seconds. Ren quietly took her father's hand. Brielle expected to be fired. Instead, Everett asked her what she had learned. She said that she had learned never to measure someone's worth by what they were wearing. Everett nodded. He told her that mistakes did not have to become permanent if people were willing to face them honestly. He did not fire Brielle. But he did remove Preston from management after discovering that several of his policies had violated the values and employment standards Everett had established. The restaurant's culture began changing immediately. The expensive customer-first policy disappeared. The dress-based assumptions disappeared. The staff began treating every guest the same way, whether they arrived in designer clothes or work boots. A few weeks later, Everett introduced something new. Every Saturday afternoon, the Willow Table offered a community meal for families who could not afford the regular menu. No questions were asked. No proof was required. Nobody was made to feel embarrassed. Brielle volunteered to help organize it. At first, she did so because she wanted to prove that she had changed. Eventually, she realized she no longer needed to prove anything. She had changed. One afternoon, she noticed a tired construction worker standing outside the restaurant with his young son. The man hesitated before entering, looking down at his dusty boots. Brielle immediately walked toward him. She welcomed them inside. She gave the boy a small menu and asked which dessert he liked best. Then she looked at the father and smiled. She told him there was always a table for them. From across the room, Everett watched quietly. Ren sat beside him, drawing another picture. This time, her drawing showed a large restaurant with dozens of people sitting together. At the center was a table. Around it were people of every kind. And above them was the same bright yellow sun. Everett asked her why she had drawn the sun so big. Ren smiled and said because everyone needed the same light. Everett kissed the top of her head. He finally understood that the hardest day at the Willow Table had also become its most important lesson. The restaurant had not nearly lost its owner that afternoon. It had nearly lost its soul. And sometimes people do not realize what they have become until life places someone vulnerable directly in front of them and asks them to choose between judgment and kindness. Brielle never forgot that day. Neither did Malcolm. Neither did Everett. And most importantly, neither did Ren. Years later, people would still talk about the Willow Table as one of the warmest restaurants in the city. But Everett never cared about the awards, the reviews, or the long lines. He cared about one thing. When someone walked through those doors, they should feel that they belonged. Because Everett had learned that a table was never just a table. Sometimes it was dignity. Sometimes it was forgiveness. Sometimes it was a second chance. And sometimes, for a tired father and a little girl who had already lost too much, it was simply a place where someone finally said, without asking what they wore or how much money they had, "You are welcome here." Before we reach the final moment, I want you to think about one question. Have you ever been judged by the way you looked, the clothes you wore, or the life you were living? If this story touched something inside you, leave a meaningful comment sharing what you believe matters more than appearances: kindness, character, or compassion. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. Because sometimes the person standing outside the door is not the person who needs to be ashamed. Sometimes they are the person who is about to teach everyone inside what it truly means to belong.